welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're having an incredible day, and in today's video we're going to be exploring different watercolor wet on wet effects such as blooms, splatters, and both controlled and uncontrolled runs. But instead of trying out these techniques and effects separately, we're going to be combining them in one same abstract piece. I'm going to be walking you through how I created this by combining different watercolor effects and techniques in both cool colors and warm colors. If this is your first time visiting my channel, welcome. I am super happy that you're here. Consider subscribing because every single Friday I share a new video with art tips, drawing and painting tutorials, and encouragement for aspiring artists. And if you do subscribe, don't forget to click on that little notification bell so that YouTube can let you know whenever I publish a new video. All of the supplies that I use to create these abstract explorations will be listed down below in the description box in case you want to go and check them out. And let's get into the video. Okay everyone, so before I actually get into this watercolor painting process for this abstract sort of controlled chaos little exploration that we're going to be doing today, I wanted to show you a couple of these explorations in their completely dried state that I created a few days ago so that I can show you exactly which techniques and which effects we're going to be creating today and focus on those so that you have a better idea what to look for as I'm moving along throughout the painting process, because I'm going to be working in a very sort of organic and intuitive way today. Now, to create these explorations, I used quite a few different wet on wet techniques, but I also used a couple of wet on dry techniques, like for example, the splattering, which I'm going to show you how to do later on. Today, I want to focus mostly on 4 different techniques. I want to show you how I create both controlled and organic runs. I want to show you how I create blooming effects by dropping in paint onto an area of paper that has been freshly painted. And finally, I'm going to show you how I do my splattering, which is super fun to do with watercolor, but it's easy to go overboard. So in terms of the paper, I am using Arches Cold Press 140-pound watercolor paper. The paint I'm using is from Winsor & Newton, and it is their Cotman watercolor tube set. And in terms of the paintbrushes, I'll only be using 2 different ones today. They are both by Royal and Langnickel from their Zen line. The first one is a 1-inch flat, and the second one is a round in a size 8. Links to all of these different products will be left down below in the description box in case you want to go and check them out. A huge thank you to everyone that has used my links, because every time you use my links, I earn a tiny commission at no extra cost to you. And these tiny commissions allow me to keep putting out helpful content for you guys. All right, let's get started with the painting process, you guys. Now, I want to explain why I decided to create cool colors and warm colors separately. Whenever you're doing this kind of exploration with a bunch of different colors, you can totally decide to use both warm and cool colors in one same piece. The reason why I decided to use them separately is because I know that when using wet on wet effects, colors are going to intermix and they have a mind of their own. If you know anything in regards to the color wheel, you're probably already well aware that when one color starts intermixing with its complementary color, it starts getting muted out. And I wanted to have full control over how my colors looked. I wanted my colors to be very bright and saturated. And so that is why I decided to keep my warm and my cool colors separately and create 2 separate studies. Now, if you want to use a whole bunch of different colors, a rainbow of colors, or however colors you want in this kind of exploration, feel free to do it. Just be aware that probably at the end, some areas of your study are going to appear kind of grayed out or even brownish. Personally, I wanted to keep that level of control in terms of how saturated and bright my colors appeared, because I knew that in many other aspects I wasn't going to have that much control because we're using so much wet on wet. So the main thing to have in mind or to understand as a beginner starting with watercolor in regards to different effects when you're doing wet on wet or wet on dry is the fact that paint is going to expand in areas of paper that are dampened. And when paper is dry, the paint is not going to expand. In other words, when you place paint mixture on an area of paper that has been pre-wetted with clean water or that already has a wash of paint on it, the second paint mixture that you place upon it is going to expand and is going to create a blurred out effect. And contrary to this, when you place paint on a piece of paper that is completely dry, either because it is a brand new sheet of paper or because the previous layers of paint have already completely dried, then that paint mixture is not going to expand. So you can use this to your advantage in order to create more sharp looking details if that's what you're going for. Learning about all of the different kinds of effects that we can create using watercolors and also practicing water control can definitely expand our horizons and helps us understand the medium so that we can create much more successful paintings in the kinds of styles and with the kinds of effects that we're looking to create. When you're doing lots of wet on wets and you're working very fast or you're not staying mindful of what's going on, or maybe you don't have enough water control yet, things happen. Things like backruns, okay? Backruns are a great example of something that some artists might consider a mistake or an error and see as something that should not ever happen in a painting, while others actually use backruns and certain effects like that to their advantage. In the second study, the one with the cool colors, I'm going to show you exactly what a backrun is. To begin these explorations, as you already saw, I started by pre-wetting my paper with clean water in a very sort of free, irregular way because I want this to look like a paint splatter at the end. Something I made sure to do in order to make this look more natural, I don't know if you noticed in the beginning when I was pre-wetting my paper, I made sure to leave some smaller areas of my paper completely dry within the larger irregular shape. This is going to help ensure that those areas are going to stay protected and completely paint-free as I start laying down my paint mixture on the pre-wetted area. Because as I mentioned before, the paint is only going to expand on areas of paper that are wet and not on areas of paper that are dry. The first wet on wet technique that you see me use when I am just starting out these explorations are blooms. And these are very beautiful effects that happen when I lay down a paint mixture on paper that is wet, either because I have pre-wetted it with clean water or because I have already laid down a wash of color previously. Now, depending on how wet the area of your paper is and how watery the paint mixture is that you're placing on this area, this could look like a beautiful gradient from one color turning into the next beside it, but it could also lead to a sort of backrun effect in which you create a very sharp looking line around the gradient or at some point in the gradient. We can also end up having a kind of splotchy effect, which we may or may not want. So it's always important to stay mindful of how wet our paper is and whether we should or shouldn't lay down a very watery paint mixture. Throughout the process, you see me shift my paper around, turning it on its side, getting it on a more of a diagonal position. And I don't know if you know this, but many watercolor artists actually work on a diagonal surface. They use gravity to their advantage. All right, let's talk a little bit about runs now. This is a technique that you can do in a controlled way or in a completely organic kind of way. To create my completely organic runs, I get my paper super wet and then turn it on the side that I want the run to happen. Eventually, with enough water and or paint mixture, the paint is not going to have a choice but to travel downwards, and this is going to create an organic looking run. However, there is a way of creating controlled runs, which means that you are completely in control of what that line or that shape looks like, and it's actually very easy to do. All you have to do is completely rinse out all of the color from your paintbrush and dampen it with clean water. So then what you're going to do is you're actually going to draw out the specific line shape that you want that run to follow with clean water. So then what you're going to do is you're going to turn your paper sideways or in a slanted position, the way that you did when you were creating the organic run. And you're going to place paint mixture, whatever you want that run color to be. You're going to place a paint mixture at the top of where the run starts. So naturally, the watercolor paint is going to travel down that damp little line that you created. It's like you created a path for it to travel down. To do my splattering effects, what I like doing is I create a very watery pigmented paint mixture, and then I like tapping one paintbrush on top of the other one in a sort of cross position until I achieve as much splattering as I want. For this first exploration, I even do a little bit of lifting with my rag in order to absorb some of the pigment from some areas and make them appear a little bit lighter. Then I allowed my study to dry completely because I wanted to check back on it, see how colors dried, because usually with watercolors, colors tend to dry much lighter than how they appear when they're wet. So I wanted to let it dry completely and come back to it to further deepen and add more contrast to some areas later on. So for the second layer, you can see me go back in and add further contrast and more pigment in some areas, and this I am doing completely wet on dry. So the previous paint layers have completely dried, which means that the paint mixture that I'm now placing on my paper doesn't expand the way that it does when I was placing it when the paper was completely wet. I also explore a bit of feathering or bleeding by drawing a clean line of water with my paintbrush right along the edge of the shape that I had just painted, and I watch the paint mixture just expand on this brand new little shape of clean water that I have placed on my paper. Many beginner watercolor artists don't know this, but it's actually very easy to soften out harsh edges or harsh lines. If you want them to not appear as stark looking, you can very easily do feathering while the paint is still wet. And even once the paint has dried completely, something that you can do is reactivate your paint. Some paint mixtures are going to be more staining than others, which means that you won't be able to lift them or move them around as easily. But for the most part, you are going to be able to do at least some softening by going back into the dried paint and doing very gentle back and forth motions with a clean dampened brush. I do recommend though, if you want to go back into certain areas of your painting and soften something out, make sure that your paintbrush is completely clean, that there is only clean water in its bristles, and also make sure that there is not a huge amount of water in it, because you may cause splotching effects that you don't want. For the second exploration, the one with the cool colors, I definitely left a back run in the top right-hand corner of the study. You can definitely see splotchiness in a very obvious line caused by this back run. So in principle, if you do not want this splotchiness and this back run line effect to happen in your painting, you have to make sure that there is less water in your brush than there is on the paper. Or allow the previous layer to dry completely and then go back in with a second wash of color. today. I hope that you found this video helpful and inspiring, and that you go and try these explorations out for yourself. They are super fun. Give me a like if you like this video, because it really helps my channel get in front of more people. Thank you so much for watching today, and see you next Friday.